Were you aware that in the past few days, a specific mRNA vaccine had been withdrawn from use or from the trial, according to the FDA? I'll give you some more details on that in a minute. But I suspect the majority of you had no idea this has happened. I'm Dr. Philip McMillan. I'm bringing to you up to date, cutting edge information and giving you some analysis from my point of view. So you have to be patient with me as I tend to look at things from a different way. And so essentially, what caught my attention was not just the story, but what was happening in close proximity to the story. So this is how it usually works is that if you want to get some bad news hidden, you bring up another big story around the same time. And so in the UK, something caught my attention, which I was just trying to understand what in the world was going on. And it's the story to do with Stephen Bartlett. And he does the Diary of a CEO podcast. And suddenly in the news, they had here that he has been sharing harmful health misinformation. What you must notice is the date, 13th of December, 2024. And so this story is talking about the fact that he's interviewed a few people that are amplifying harmful health misinformation on this huge podcast. Now, you have to understand that this is one of the biggest podcasts in the world. I think he's just hit 1 billion downloads. And so a lot of people are fascinated with the topics. They're very interested in his conversations, but he's not a subject matter expert. And so, yes, he's interviewing people who have controversial thoughts. And so, therefore, it's quite possible that he has some of his interviewees on who say some things that the mainstream may not like. But that shouldn't be the fact that he has an opportunity to talk to them. But more important than the fact that this has gone on, because that was the breaking news on the 13th of December, at exactly the same time, there was also a BBC investigation which was produced. Again, finds potentially harmful health misinformation. This is not a story, this is a whole production. And so, what it means is that this was prepared beforehand. So, the question then is when it was prepared beforehand, is there any relevance to the 13th of December when they released this story? So, the reason I asked that question, because I was reflecting on this today and I was thinking, yeah, okay, they don't like what he was talking about, but they could have probably released that story 5 or 6 months ago. Why do it now? And so, in my mind, I go scratching my head and thinking, okay, if they were going to hide some important news, what happened in the past week that could be significant? And so, based on what I did a simple Google search here, just so you can see. I typed it in and I spoke about Moderna and RSV vaccine. And I looked at the BBC stories, and there is nothing recent about this story. This is important. Okay, so you have to understand what happened. So, to bring you to the story. So, and you look at the dates, remember, understand the dates so that you understand how this thing works. So, this is now coming out on the 13th of December. How coincidental. Safety signal Moderna's RSV vaccine studies halts trials of other vaccines for childhood killer. So the company found that since it gave it shot, some of the infected kids got sicker after being vaccinated with this mRNA RSV vaccine. And this is the story here again. So the prospects have dimmed for some infant vaccines against the virus. And what they said is that in recent clinical trials, two experimental RSV vaccines, which will be mRNA for babies, may not have failed to protect them, but actually made some of them sicker when they got RSV or another respiratory virus. This is important. This is a big story. And this is a story that everybody should be aware of, to be frank with you, but it is relatively quiet. You have to search for this. And interestingly, when I did a look at, again, just a simple Google search trying to tie things together, I was looking again at, you have this big headline top, 31st of May 2024. They received approval for the RSV vaccine. If I click on that link there, page not found. This is news that is meant to disappear. This is different for the adults. So they have got approval for their adult RSV vaccine, but they were also trying to push through for the pediatric or the children's version, and that didn't seem to be stacking up. There are clearly challenges. Now, it doesn't mean that they can't go on with the trial, but the FDA has called that, whoops, you need to stop. Let's check and see what was happening, because it seemed that more children were getting RSV infection or getting worse after they got exposed to RSV. From my point of view, from a scientific point of view, this makes perfect sense, meaning that this is, when I base on the science, the logic of it seems to me that this is the pattern that one would expect to see in the context of mRNA vaccines, meaning that they help the body to produce the abnormal protein or the protein that they want to target, but the mechanism or the strategy that is used invariably has an impact on the immune system. And what I mean by that, I'll show you. I did this presentation recently, and I think it's important just to go over a few points so that you understand a few principles about mRNA. When you compare the main COVID vaccines, so not RSV, the principles are similar. When you looked at the AstraZeneca and the J&J vaccines, these were adenovirus vaccines, and they therefore used a viral vector to take the DNA inside the cell, where it would then be made into RNA and then into the spike protein. So that's the route for the J&J and the AstraZeneca vaccines. Conversely, the mRNA vaccines, the advantage that they have been pushing hard for is that these vaccines don't need to go inside the DNA of the cell, into the nucleus of the cell, sorry. But they, once they release their mRNA, it will then be made straight into spike proteins, which will then trigger an immune response. And the principle that they are targeting here, the advantage of this is because they can change this mRNA so quickly, it means that if a new variant of a virus or something came up, they could then quickly adjust this and therefore get adjusted spike proteins or other parts of a virus being formed. That's the principle with regards to mRNA technology. That's fine. But as I said, there is a very simple question I ask all the time, for which I don't think I've had a good answer. And it's simply that in order for the body to do that, or the cell to do that, it requires that the cellular guards are immobilized. What I mean by that is that each cell doesn't normally let any foreign mRNA get in and make protein, because that's exactly what a virus does. And so it has guards in place against that to stop that occurring. But in order for the mRNA vaccine to work, it has to suppress this guard, get past it. And so what then happens technically is that if you imagine the mRNA, in order for it to make this protein, this then protection inside the cell has to be immobilized. Now, in theory, what they hope is that after they immobilize this, the internal protection within the cell, that this cell then gets destroyed, and so therefore it's not relevant. But as you can see, in real life, it doesn't work like that. And so, what has been happening, therefore, is that you have a situation where not all the cells, it seems, that get this mRNA necessarily die. And so, therefore, you have a problem going forward. And that's the essence of this. And in order to understand a little bit more, and this is the bit that I had then explained in a little bit more detail, and I'll show you this here, is that as you understand what the protections are, and this is what it looks like, is that here would be the RNA inside the lipid nanoparticle. It then needs to be made into protein. But very quickly, as soon as it gets in the cell, normally these two proteins, RIG1 and MDA5, would immediately bind to the RNA and block it. But they don't use normal mRNA. They use modified. I have. Let me clarify. I got censored for saying this word, so let me clarify. The mRNA, some of the nucleosides in it are changed. They are not exactly the same as normal mRNA. Trying to see how to say this without some sense of jumping on me. So there is a slight difference. So normal mRNA has a uridine in it, and it sometimes uses pseudouridine. So originally, they found that if you increase the pseudouridine, that can get past the sensors. And actually, in the COVID vaccines, they went on to use methyl pseudouridine. They don't like the word modified. They prefer mRNA. And so I will not use the word modified. I'll just say mRNA. So the mRNA then still has to get past. And in the process, as I said, of getting past these cellular blocks, because what happens is that these proteins, as soon as they're triggered with foreign RNA, they then trigger a whole cascade of events to produce interferon. And the interferon then blocks the production of any more proteins. So, in the process of getting past this, technically, they're blocking interferon. And interferon is the warning cytokine. It's produced to protect your cells and your body against infection. When you feel unwell after viral infection, that's interferon, and that's surging. It's telling all the cells to shut down. It's pulling in immune cells and so on. So all of that mechanism, therefore, is not working the same. And this is where the issue comes, because even when we consider the COVID vaccines here, we knew from a study, this is from Cleveland Clinic, they were noticing that after booster vaccines, 0 doses, 1 dose, 2 dose, 3 doses, greater than 3 doses, this is the cumulative incidence of infection. And what it was showing is that the more doses, technically, the higher the risk of an infection. Doesn't mean severe infection, just an infection. And so the argument is that even though there is an infection, it is milder and therefore not relevant. But the important point is that there is an increased risk, it seems, from the study of an infection occurring. And so that's very, very important in terms of understanding now why I say I'm not surprised when we go back to the study, which is that in effect they found that it failed to protect them, and they got sicker when they got RSV or another respiratory virus. And this is the point: is that the whole premise of the technology is that it has to evade the cellular immune response in order for the cells to produce a specific protein. So there are some kinks in it. I'm not sure how they can iron out such a fundamental kink in the way how it works, but that's up to them. And so we now need to understand what are the implications going forward. So back to the big news story. And the big news story, there are more places that have covered this story, but it's not the mainstream. This is from Biospace on the 13th of December. FDA committee calls for more research after Moderna's RSV safety issues. And as they said here, following news of the RSV lower respiratory tract infections in infants immunized with the Moderna's investigational mRNA vaccines, FDA advisors said that the trial investigators should continue the study while keeping an eye out for further safety signals. That's an important point. So they have had this issue that is coming up, and so they met on Thursday to discuss these findings. But when we look here at this is MedPage, FDA advisors say more data needed for RSV vaccines in young kids, a very complicated situation after the mRNA vaccine trial was halted. So this is huge news, but as I said, it's just coincidental that on the same day when you have such an important piece of information, out in mainstream here, they're talking about misinformation from a podcast. Why are they not interested in that story? Is it that they didn't know? I can't believe that. That is probably one of the biggest stories to come out because it has implications not just for RSV, but for other vaccines when we think about it. So these are important points. And I'm just sharing you my thoughts because I sometimes wonder when big stories are not covered and then we see another story that is being made big, it suggests to me that maybe there is a thought that we will cover some bad news with other news so that you will not be aware. This is the reality that we're facing. And so, yes, you have to stay vigilant and you have to stay focused. And in that process, remember, as I said, that's what I'm giving you information. Remember, Disease X, are you prepared? We're still number one in viral diseases. Help us to stay there. Share this for the Christmas. This is what the front cover looks like. We are using COVID-19 as the template to explain about how this works, what are the mistakes from the pandemic, how we can prepare better for the future, and critically giving you information and understanding in a beautiful story format. There's some written by John McMillan, my brother, written some beautiful stories to highlight some of these issues that we have seen over the period of time. So yes, support us. The link is in the description below. And as always, my aim is to keep you updated. So just remember, don't get distracted all the time by the news. Learn to, whenever you see something that doesn't quite fit, ask the question, why now? Why is it relevant today? Is there something else that I should be focused on? Thank you and have a good evening.